The courtroom was unusually full that morning. The media had caught wind of a high-profile federal hearing involving former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, and curiosity buzzed like static in the air. Judge Edward Chen presided, his reputation as a sharp-tongued and no-nonsense magistrate preceding him. Pam Bondi sat at the front, impeccably dressed in a charcoal blazer, her expression composed, her posture unshakably straight. She was representing a whistleblower group aiming to expose alleged misuse of federal emergency funds by a private contractor with deep government ties Judge Chen had quietly dismissed in previous motions. From the moment the hearing began, it was clear Chen had no intention of letting Bondi make her case smoothly. "Ms. Bondi," he said, barely hiding a smirk, "let's not confuse the courtroom with cable news. Keep your dramatics for your next TV spot." A few quiet chuckles echoed from the gallery. Bondi didn't flinch. She simply turned a page in her file and said evenly, "I'll proceed with the facts, Your Honor. Unless the court objects to transparency." Chen leaned back, eyes narrowed. "Objection sustained in advance, Ms. Bondi. This court won't serve as your soapbox." The tension climbed. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked discreetly behind tinted glass. Something felt off. Because just outside that courtroom door, unseen, two federal marshals were being briefed by an official from the office of the Inspector General. And in that folder he held was something that would change everything Judge Edward Chen thought he controlled. Outside the courtroom, in a quiet hallway guarded by two stern-faced security officers, Special Agent Lorna Keene from the Office of the Inspector General handed over a sealed manila folder to the U.S. Marshals. Her voice was low and controlled. "Judge Edward Chen knowingly suppressed material evidence in Case 317B, she said. What's inside that envelope confirms it: wire transfers, redacted memos he unsealed for the defense, and a sworn affidavit from a former clerk." The lead marshal, a square-jawed man named Detmer, flipped through the pages. His eyebrows twitched. "You sure about this timing?" he asked. Keene didn't blink. "We do this now. Quietly. Before he closes another case that shouldn't have even been in his hands." Back inside, Judge Chen had grown more aggressive. He waved his hand dismissively as Bondi attempted to submit a classified document under seal. "Ms. Bondi, I won't let you parade classified fluff into my courtroom under the guise of national interest. You are wasting this court's time," he sneered. Pam Bondi's eyes locked on his. "Your Honor, the document I'm presenting was declassified last night by direct order of the DOJ. If you deny it again, it will be the third time you've blocked admissible evidence in this case." A hush fell. Even the gallery seemed to collectively hold its breath. Judge Chen leaned forward. "Then maybe you should appeal to someone who cares, Ms. Bondi." He had just finished that sentence, when the double doors creaked open. Two U.S. Marshals stepped inside. No announcement. No warning. No hesitation. Every neck turned. Pam Bondi remained motionless. She'd seen this kind of entrance before, but never in the middle of a hearing. The click of the marshal's boots against the marble floor echoed louder than any gavel could. Judge Chen froze mid-sentence, his lips still parted in that smirk that had just belittled Bondi seconds ago. "Excuse me," he said, brow furrowing. "This is a closed session." "Who authorized?" Marshal Detmer stepped forward, calm and firm. "By order of the Office of the Inspector General and the Chief Judge of the Ninth Circuit, we are here to escort Judge Edward M. Chen from the bench. Effective immediately." Gasps broke out in the gallery. Someone dropped a pen. The court reporter's hands hovered, unsure whether to keep typing. Chen's face paled. "This is outrageous," he snapped, rising from his chair. "On what grounds are you?" Keene walked in behind the marshals, holding up a leather-bound DOJ case file. "Obstruction of justice. Suppression of federal evidence. Unlawful communication with defense counsel in case 317B. And 3 sealed counts I'm not authorized to say out loud in this courtroom." Pam Bondi turned slowly, her gaze neutral, but intense. For the first time, Chen looked directly at her, as if trying to decipher how much she knew. "You set this up," he said quietly, disbelief creeping into his voice. Bondi answered without a smile, without even a trace of satisfaction. "No, Judge. You did. The moment you thought the robe made you untouchable." The gallery sat in stunned silence as the marshals stepped closer. Judge Chen's voice, once so commanding, now trembled slightly. "You can't do this. I'm a sitting federal judge." Detmer calmly removed the handcuffs from his belt. "Not anymore." The sound of the handcuffs clicking around Judge Chen's wrists landed heavier than any verdict he'd ever delivered. The room was still. The only movement came from phones being slowly, discreetly lifted, some by reporters, others by stunned onlookers who had never seen a judge led away in chains. Even the court clerk had stopped typing, eyes wide, hands trembling above the keyboard. Judge Chen's voice cracked as he tried to regain some measure of control. "I demand counsel. This is a violation of judicial independence." Special Agent Keene didn't flinch. "What you did was a violation of the law. You used your position to bury whistleblower testimony, reroute evidence, and protect contracts connected to your former clients. We have everything. Your time behind that bench is over." As the marshals guided him toward the exit, Chen twisted his head around one last time. "This is political. You're letting her," he pointed at Bondi, eyes wild. "You're letting her run the courtroom now." Pam stood slowly, walked to the bench, and looked him directly in the eye. "I didn't run anything, Judge. I followed the law. You just thought you were above it." The door shut behind Chen with a heavy thud. The judge's seat now sat empty, still warm with the arrogance that had filled it only moments ago. A buzz erupted in the gallery, whispers, stunned reactions, the unmistakable shuffling of reporters rushing out to call their editors. The courtroom was officially without a judge, but for the first time all morning, it felt like justice had just arrived. Pam turned to Agent Keene. "What happens now?" Keene replied with a nod. "Now. You finish your case." After a stunned pause, the courtroom clerk rose shakily and addressed the room. "This hearing is suspended until a new presiding judge is assigned. All parties will be notified of rescheduling within 48 hours. The gavel, which Judge Chen had slammed so confidently just minutes earlier, now sat abandoned on the bench like a relic from a past regime. Pam Bondi collected her files calmly, but her eyes scanned the room like a seasoned litigator trained to see the ripple effects. She noticed the quiet discomfort on the faces of the defense attorneys, who had relied on Chen's leniency for months. Their confidence had drained away, replaced by something closer to dread. A junior lawyer leaned over to whisper to his lead counsel. "Without Chen, this whole strategy falls apart." On her way out, Bondi was approached by a tall woman in a dark suit, Assistant U.S. Attorney Denise Rourke. "I've been waiting to meet you in person," Rourke said, extending a hand. "That was surgical." Pam shook it briefly. "I didn't come here to take down a judge. I came here to expose a $400 million diversion of federal funds." Rourke nodded. "Well, the court just cleared its own throat. The replacement judge will be here by Friday. Until then, we'll be reviewing the material Chen buried. Some of it's damning. Your whistleblowers may have just saved the federal government from a scandal the size of Enron." Pam didn't smile, but her jaw tightened with purpose. "Then we'd better make sure the next judge lets the truth see daylight." As she walked through the corridor outside, media crews began to scramble for position. Microphones extended toward her like spears. "Ms. Bondi. Did you know Judge Chen was under investigation? Was this part of your strategy all along? Do you believe there are more compromised judges involved in this case?" Pam stopped for just a moment and faced the cameras. "I came here to argue a case," she said. The court chose how it wanted to respond. The truth is bigger than one bench. And with that, she turned and disappeared into the elevator, leaving the nation to process what had just unfolded inside the courtroom. By the time Pam Bondi returned to her downtown office, her inbox had exploded, calls from federal contacts, media inquiries, and encrypted messages from whistleblowers she hadn't heard from in months. But one email stood out. It was short. Untraceable. Just a file attachment and one line, Chen was just the start. This ledger connects 3 more judges. A friend, she opened the file. It was a scanned document, faded, handwritten columns in a spiral notebook. But the contents hit like a sledgehammer. It listed contract numbers, court cases, initials of federal judges, and recurring payments from shell accounts traced to a single consulting firm. The same firm Bondi had named in her whistleblower petition. Her heart pounded. She picked up her encrypted phone and dialed Rourke. "I just got something that changes everything," Pam said without preamble. "You're not going to believe this," Rourke replied, almost breathless. "We just subpoenaed Chen's clerk. He's ready to talk. Says he was threatened, and that Chen wasn't the only one coordinating with that firm." There was a long pause between them. "Pam," Rourke added carefully, "this may not be just corruption. This might be a network." Bondi's gaze shifted to her office window, where the city moved unknowingly beneath her. "I'm sending you the file now," she said. "But tell your team to be careful. If Chen went down this fast, whoever's behind this knows their wall just cracked, and they won't go quietly." That night, security was doubled. Bondi's legal team moved their operation to a secure facility under DOJ protection. The public still thought the story ended with a judge in handcuffs. But in reality, it had only just begun. The next morning, Pam Bondi arrived at the secure DOJ satellite office just outside the city, flanked by federal protection detail. Inside, her team was already assembled, white boards filled with names, contract codes, and red string connecting once untouchable figures. At the center was the consulting firm, Veritex Solutions. The firm had served as a quiet intermediary between federal contracts and expedited approvals. What no one realized, until now, was that it had been funneling money through offshore accounts, then kicking portions back to select judges overseeing those very contract disputes. Pam stood at the head of the conference table, pointing at the ledger projected on the screen. 3 initials repeat on the payout entries, she said. EMC is Chen. But we now have AHS and TWR, 2 more sitting judges in the circuit. Rourke crossed her arms. That matches what Chen's clerk just testified. He overheard all 3 names in a conference call on encrypted phones. Veritex coordinated court outcomes in exchange for protection from federal audits. Pam turned to the whistleblower liaison. "Where are we with the original source of the ledger?" "Still dark," he replied. "They've been silent since sending the file. We traced the metadata to a remote server in West Virginia, but it was wiped 5 minutes after delivery." Pam's instincts kicked in. They knew we'd come looking. A sudden knock at the door interrupted the session. A young DOJ analyst leaned in, her face pale. "Ma'am. One of the judges you just mentioned, TWR, just submitted an emergency recusal motion on all active cases." No explanation. Bondi and Rourke locked eyes. "That's not recusal," Pam said. "That's panic." Rourke stepped back from the table. "If he's cutting and running, we've got a 24-hour window before evidence starts disappearing, and witnesses start backing out." Pam didn't hesitate. "Then we make the first move. Tonight." By 8:15 p.m., the DOJ task force had gone into full lockdown mode. In a sealed room beneath the federal complex, Pam Bondi, Denise Rourke, and a small team of agents and analysts reviewed one final operations checklist. 3 simultaneous warrant executions were being prepped, one in Sacramento, where Judge TWR resided, another in Seattle for a Veritex offshore account handler, and the third at the Veritex Solutions headquarters in D.C., a seemingly innocuous office suite inside a corporate tower. Rourke pulled up a classified surveillance feed. Judge TWR was seen clearing documents from his chambers this afternoon. If he's running, this might be our last chance to grab what we need before it's gone forever. Pam reviewed the affidavit one last time, her signature now already on the order. He doesn't get a head start. No more backroom deals, no more sealed whispers. Let's bring it into the light. At precisely 9 p.m., 3 SWAT teams moved in. In Sacramento, agents knocked twice before breaching the rear door of a sprawling estate. Inside, Judge Theodore W. Raines, TWR, was found shredding files in his home office, still in his robes. A private server was seized. He didn't say a word as he was handcuffed. In Seattle, the offshore handler tried to escape through a back entrance but was intercepted by 2 plainclothes agents posing as Uber drivers. And in D.C., agents stormed Veritex's corporate suite and accessed an internal network of hard drives with traceable metadata, some of which matched Judge Chen's rulings down to the date and docket number. Back in the operations center, an agent ran in holding a flash drive. We pulled something from the Veritex server. You'll want to see this. Pam and Rourke gathered around. The screen lit up with audio clips, private phone calls, encrypted files, even a conference call transcript between EMC, TWR, and a third judge, AHS. Pam froze. That wasn't just any judge. AHS, she said slowly. Andrew H. Stones, the one who ruled against us in the Gibson Pharma case. Rourke exhaled. They weren't just bending law. They were controlling outcomes, nationwide. Pam nodded grimly. Then it's not just corruption anymore. It's a coordinated conspiracy. The next morning, headlines erupted across every major outlet: second federal judge arrested in Veritex bribery ring, third under active investigation, whistleblower case tied to massive judicial corruption network, Pam Bondi leads federal crackdown. Pam Bondi barely glanced at the coverage. Her focus was locked on Judge Andrew H. Stones. Unlike Chen and Raines, Stones was careful, paranoid, even. No luxury estates, no flamboyant wire transfers. But the Veritex logs proved one thing: he had funneled rulings to protect companies flagged for audit, in exchange for favors that bypassed money entirely. Stock options, family hires, offshore real estate, all buried beneath layers of privilege and plausible deniability. That morning, Bondi sat across from Special Agent Keene in a private DOJ conference room. Between them was a full transcript, digitally decrypted, of a call between Stones and Veritex executives. Keene tapped the screen. Here, this is the moment he instructs Veritex to bury the Bondi brief. He knew you had uncovered the Gibson Pharma trial evidence. He tried to kill it off before it reached discovery. Pam's jaw tightened. Then we issue a motion to reopen Gibson. And we hit him with an ethics investigation, now. Just then, Rourke stepped into the room, holding her phone out. You're not going to believe this. Judge Stones just sent an emergency resignation letter. Effective immediately. No reason given. Pam narrowed her eyes. He's fleeing. Rourke nodded. Already chartered a jet. Headed toward a private airfield in upstate New York. Pam stood, grabbed her bag. Then let's give him a send-off. Within the hour, Bondi and a team of federal agents arrived at the airfield just as a sleek black jet was being prepped for takeoff. Stones, dressed in civilian clothes, was boarding alone, head down, avoiding eye contact. Judge Stones. Pam called across the tarmac. He turned. The moment his eyes met hers, he knew. His face collapsed in a flash of shame, fear, and bitter recognition. Pam held up the official federal order. You're not leaving the country tonight. You're answering for every ruling you sold. Seconds later, agents stepped in and quietly cuffed the third judge in the Veritex conspiracy. 3 corrupt benches. 3 fallen robes. But Pam Bondi wasn't finished yet. Because someone else had signed the original Veritex Incorporation paperwork. And that name hadn't appeared, yet. Back at the DOJ command center, Bondi stood before a digital whiteboard filled with names, court seals, contracts, and lines connecting every confirmed player in the Veritex network. 3 judges had already fallen, but at the heart of it all was something they had missed. Rourke entered with a grim expression and handed over a freshly unsealed incorporation document recovered from the Veritex DC raid. "This is the original 2015 formation paperwork," she said. "Filed through a Delaware proxy, like most shell firms, but we forced the state registrar to release the sealed ownership declaration." Pam's eyes scanned the page, corporate language, masked addresses, layers of legal fog, until her gaze stopped on one signature, M. J. Kessler, founding director Veritex Solutions Incorporated. Pam's face went stone cold. Rourke whispered, "You know him?" "I prosecuted him," Pam replied. 10 years ago. Michael James Kessler, former Treasury legal advisor. He was disbarred for ethics violations and quietly disappeared. Nobody's seen him in a decade. Keene leaned forward. "Then where's he been hiding?" Pam didn't blink. "In plain sight, using other people's robes and reputations to stay clean. Chen, Raines, Stones, they were all just chess pieces." Keene spoke up. "We've already put out a federal trace order. No property, no bank records, no direct digital trail since 2016. The only link we have is a blind trust out of Zurich that moved funds directly into Veritex." Pam exhaled. "He built a system so the judges took the fall while he stayed untouchable. Until now," Rourke added. They all turned toward the board again. Every name connected. Every thread tied back to that single signature. Pam tapped her pen against Kessler's name. "We bring him in. And when we do, this won't be a courtroom scandal anymore." She looked up. "This will be the largest judicial corruption takedown in U.S. history." Michael J. Kessler had vanished from public life a decade ago, but the network he left behind had operated with surgical precision. Now, with 3 federal judges in custody and the Veritex architecture exposed, all paths pointed to him, and yet, no one could find him. Until a single mistake. "Ma'am," an analyst called out in the DOJ cyber unit. "We just flagged a signal." A dormant server in Luxembourg came online briefly, just 6 seconds, but it pinged a secure DOJ endpoint. Pam Bondi and Rourke rushed over. On screen was an IP trace showing encrypted traffic routed through nearly a dozen countries before reaching a private device registered under a dummy law firm, KS Advisory. Pam's voice was calm but urgent. "Pull the access logs. Any account credentials?" The analyst nodded. 1. Admin handle, old robe 1. Keene stepped in. "That's him. That's Kessler." Pam leaned in. "Then we're done waiting." Within hours, Interpol was notified. A red notice was issued. Kessler had just painted a target on his own back. That night, Pam and Rourke were debriefing with Homeland Security and senior DOJ officials in a sealed room. A new war room had been established, not just to pursue Kessler, but to map every contract Veritex touched. Pam pulled up a contract dated 2020, Defense Medical Logistics Package, $690 million. It had been fast-tracked by Judge Chen and protected by Judge Raines. Rourke read it over. This contract funded faulty PPE in 3 federal hospitals. 2 whistleblowers were silenced. Pam shook her head. It was never just about money. People died because of these decisions. Just then, a secure call came in on the encrypted line. The voice on the other end was deep, older, but unmistakably clear. "Ms. Bondi. Congratulations. You've proven quite persistent. But be careful. The people I built this for, they don't go to prison. They vanish." The line went dead. Pam stood frozen. "Was that?" Rourke asked. Pam nodded slowly. Kessler. And he wasn't afraid. He was daring them to keep going. The message from Michael J. Kessler wasn't just a warning, it was a challenge. And Pam Bondi wasn't one to back down. Over the next 72 hours, every DOJ and Homeland Security unit involved in the Veritex investigation went into high gear. The ledger had become a blueprint, the wire transfers a map. Every corporate shell, every judicial backchannel, every false identity, now laid bare. But Kessler remained one step ahead. Until Zurich. An undercover agent embedded in the Swiss banking system flagged a sudden withdrawal from one of the blind trusts linked to Veritex. A luxury charter jet, booked under a fake name, headed to a private island in the Adriatic. Pam and Keene coordinated with NATO and Interpol. A sting was arranged. At sunrise, in a quiet hangar just outside Split, Croatia, armed agents closed in on a gray-haired man dressed like a retired diplomat, wearing a forged UN credential badge. Michael J. Kessler. He didn't run. Didn't resist. Just smiled faintly and said, "Took you long enough." Back in Washington, D.C., Kessler was flown under heavy guard and indicted on 27 federal charges: racketeering, conspiracy, judicial bribery, and obstruction of justice. Pam Bondi stood before a packed press room at the DOJ, flanked by Rourke, Keene, and the 3 federal marshals who had brought down the corrupt judges. This case wasn't just about bad rulings or broken oaths, she said. It was about restoring faith in the system. A courtroom is supposed to be sacred. But when it's used as a weapon to serve power, we all lose. Today, we take it back. In the aftermath, Judge Stones was disbarred and sentenced. Raines took a plea deal and cooperated. Chen faced trial and was convicted. Kessler's network was dismantled, dozens of federal contractors, legal fixers, and financial operatives exposed. Veritex was dissolved. And new oversight laws for judicial conduct were introduced under the bipartisan Bondi Reform Act. The scandal made history. But Pam Bondi never celebrated. Because justice wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Of a new fight. For a system that works, for everyone. Months after the final arrest, the dust had settled, but the impact had not. Pam Bondi stood alone at the steps of the restored federal courthouse in D.C., the same courthouse where Judge Edward Chen once humiliated her. Now, his name was removed from the plaque outside. His courtroom had been reassigned, scrubbed clean of his legacy. But the public hadn't forgotten. Nor had Pam. Inside, a new judge presided. One chosen through an oversight panel that didn't exist a year ago, thanks to the Bondi Reform Act, now law. The act mandated transparency in judicial appointments, forensic audits of court-linked financials, and a permanent watchdog office empowered to investigate misconduct at every level of the federal bench. Still, not everything could be undone. 3 whistleblowers had lost careers. 1 had disappeared overseas. And despite their victory, Veritex's influence had rippled across hundreds of government decisions for years. The consequences would echo long after Kessler's sentence. Pam sat down quietly in the back of courtroom 3B, not to speak, but to observe. A young attorney stood before the bench, presenting evidence in a civil fraud case. The judge listened intently. No bias. No sarcasm. No games. Justice, real justice, was being practiced again. As she rose to leave, a clerk approached and whispered, "You know he used to watch your arguments, right?" The new judge said he learned courtroom integrity from your work. Pam just nodded. Then maybe we're starting to fix it. She stepped into the sunlight, a folder in hand, marked with a new case, a new name, and a fresh trail. The fight wasn't over. It never really was. But for the first time in years, the scales didn't feel so lopsided. And the gavel finally sounded like it belonged to the people again.